Welcome to Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to resilience, business continuity, disaster planning, anything that helps you, your organization, or your community plan for, respond to, and overcome adverse situations. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, please feel free. You can find me on LinkedIn. I am the only Alex Fullick there. I'm really easy to find, and I do respond to everything I get. As longtime viewers and listeners know, I tend to speak at different conferences or attend conferences. And recently, I attended the Continuity Insights Conference in Charlotte, North Carolina, and ran into today's guest. I'd like to welcome to the show Jennifer Park. Jennifer, welcome.
Thanks so much, Alex. I'm really excited to be here and talk with you.
Well, I'm glad we ran into each other and had a great chat at the Continuity Insights Conference. And you agreed to come on. And today we're going to talk about the downplaying of business continuity. But before we get there, can you take a minute or two and tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and how you got into this industry of ours?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do so. So, I am currently the Senior Manager of Global Business Resilience at Boston Scientific. For those who don't know, Boston Scientific is a medical device company, and we are a global company. So, we have manufacturing, distribution, and sales offices around the globe. From that position, I actually oversee our business continuity program as well as our supply chain resilience program. I've been with Boston for just a little bit over 3 years doing this role. And prior to that, I was at Hanover Insurance, which is a mid-sized US-based insurance company. Also was a manager of business continuity at that location. And prior to that, I was in business continuity at the Gemological Institute of America, GIA for short. Most people know it for the Four Cs of Diamonds, and that company does diamond grading, but they also run trade schools. And that's how I actually got into business continuity. I was the director of the New York City-based trade school, and I was working with our business continuity team to develop plans for the school and what would happen if a disaster should strike, and how are we going to keep our students safe, as well as how do we keep educating them. In that role, along the lines, I got married, I had my first child, and I decided, maybe I want to take a little bit of a step back, that new love of the new baby and your first baby. And when I decided to do that, the woman who was running our business continuity program said, hey, I have an opportunity for a part-time position in business continuity. If you'd be interested in not leaving the workforce entirely, it's still something that you are working on and can continue to support the school, as well as build out the laboratory, which is where the diamond grading happens. So I said, sure, why not? Like, sounds fun. I really liked working with Renee at the time. And so that's what I did. I started off part-time, and over the next sort of 2.5 years, I worked my way back up to full-time and really enjoyed that business continuity lens. My background is not in business continuity. It's
Hmm.
actually in geology and earth sciences. So I have a master's degree in geology, one in oceanography, and I really loved when I was learning to think about systems as a whole. How are we looking at the ocean as a whole? How are we looking at the earth as a whole? And for me, business continuity was sort of a natural evolution of learning about a company as a whole. I feel like that's one of the fun things about business continuity. We're one of the few groups that talk to everybody and really get that holistic view of what a company does and all the different inner working parts of it. And so for me, that was sort of a natural interest of mine to keep looking at things as a system. And so that's how I got into business continuity.
Oh, well, I'm glad we ran into each other, and I'm glad you accepted
Yeah,
my invitation to be on the show.
yeah, me too. It was really nice to meet you at the conference. It was a fun conference to go to.
It was. And as I mentioned earlier, today we're going to talk about the downplaying of business
Yep.
continuity management, which I thought was rather interesting.
Yeah.
So why don't I start with the first question that I have for
Mhm.
you is why do organizations or leadership in general take a short-term view of business continuity and resilience?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of different reasons. I think pre-COVID, there was definitely a different mindset of things are going fine. We've been able to handle stuff that comes up. They're typically smaller events and incidents. And I think a lot of those companies were like, we've practiced this, we've got this. We can handle the winter storms, we can handle the occasional internet outage or power outage. And so I think people felt really comfortable and confident with it. And also, we're feeling like it's a regulatory requirement for a lot of the financial institutions where it's just kind of a check the box. Yep, we've met at the audit requirements. And then COVID hit, which was a huge resurgence, I think, for business continuity and resilience. And everybody was panicked, like, oh my God, it's a global pandemic. What do we do? How do we send everybody home overnight? Which is typically not what a lot of companies, I think, were thinking of prior to that. And so there's this renewed interest in business continuity. How are we handling it? What's everybody doing? And then I think now it's been, 4+ years, and I think people are starting to feel like, again, we handled it. We got through a global pandemic. We managed to solve it without, probably a lot of, for most companies, not an up-to-date pandemic plan, not an up-to-date, sending everybody to home, to work from home plan. And they're like, we figured it out. At the end of the day, the companies were still running. And so I feel like they're like, we got through this and we're good. And so I feel like we're kind of getting back into that mindset of we were able to handle it and we're going to keep doing that. So I think that's one. The other one that I think is really interesting is, and I'm having this conversation with some of my business partners, and the thought is that in times of growth, resilience, business continuity, and obsolescence tends to get cut. It's not exciting. It's not a sort of sexy story to tell people about what you're doing to just kind of maintain the status quo or to maintain operations as is. Everybody wants to hear about growth. They want to hear about, new profits and things like that. And so it's just, I feel like it's not an exciting story that's told on quarterly earnings calls. And I think that that tends to be a lot of what drives at least US market business. It's all about the stock market and increasing revenue for and profit for our investors. And so resiliency isn't that fun to talk about, quite frankly.
It kind of reminds me of we've had some big events in history. We've had in the last few decades, we've had Y2K. Nothing happened. So
Yep.
we got through it.
Yep.
We've had 9/11, a terrible event, but companies got through it.
Right.
We had SARS, H1N1 in different parts of the world. We got through it. We've had
Yep.
COVID, as you mentioned. We got
Yep.
through it. So there seems to be a mindset of, we will just tick the box and we'll go forward. Is it because we just think of the last situation? If we got through it, then we build up our confidence, believing that, rightly or wrongly, whatever happens next, we got it.
Yeah, that's kind of my opinion too, is that people feel, potentially rightly or maybe wrong, that they do have the confidence. They were able to handle it. Nothing, there were bumps in the road for companies, but nothing truly disastrous befell them. Or if it did, they're no longer in business. And so, they've learned that lesson the really hard way. And so that's what I think about. And I think, what I tend to tell my business partners when we're working about plans is business continuity isn't going to prevent the disaster. There's a whole host of other things you can do, resiliency, risk assessments, mitigation work from that. I feel like when you have a business continuity plan, the idea is for it to feel like a more controlled response when something bad happens. We're not preventing it, but I don't want people to feel like they're in a panic of like the sky is falling, kind of Chicken Little, and running around like that. When you have a business continuity plan that's thought out, you're going to feel confident in knowing what exactly you should be doing at those different inflection points and making those decisions. Either sometimes when you can make them ahead of time, or at the time of, you've already know who the right people to bring into the room are to have those conversations. And so that's what I try and reassure our business partners. It's not that bad things aren't going to happen, but it's that we feel comfortable and confident in knowing how we're going to respond to it. That's the real value for a business continuity plan and program.
You mentioned a couple of other things there. You mentioned
Yeah.
on some of the calls, your updates
Yep.
with leadership and board of directors or many
Yeah.
management levels.
Yep.
The talk is about growth and the bottom line and money, except that tends to look on what's coming up in the future,
Yep.
not what's happening right now. Do we have what right now is protected? It's let's just keep marching forward.
Yeah.
Business continuity tends to lag behind because of either budget cuts or lack of participation or support.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't end up really marching with the organization because of the growth mindset.
Yep. Yeah, I would agree completely. And I think, again, I feel like our executives a lot of time don't necessarily know some of that full story of where the risks potentially are. I feel like a lot of times truly good leaders will say, I hired you for your skill set so that you know what you're doing and you're doing your job. And that if there was a high risk, you would either be handling it yourself and taking care of it, or if it gets to the point where it's something beyond your either skill level or budgetary constraints, that you would then escalate things. And so I feel like there's sort of that disruption between the leadership of a department or a division handling anything that kind of comes up and what the executive leaders really need to know or as part of their regular conversation. And so there is that little bit of a disconnect. And I think that's why sometimes business continuity can fall behind. I also think about, I was just thinking about this conversation earlier today, and I was like, I feel like I am 100% guilty of this, but I think about things like my car. When you buy a car, you've got your however many year um, loan payments. And what do the financial, advisors say? They say when you've paid off that car loan, you should keep putting that same payment into a savings account because in a couple years down the road, when you need to buy your next car, you'll have a really nice nest egg. And I think that's a really great idea. Do I do that? Absolutely not. There's always something that we could use to spend that money on. There's some other priority. There's some kids' activity that I have to spend it on. And so I don't do that. So I also think like a little bit like I'm just as guilty of these same choices in my personal life as businesses tend to do in their professional life. And I don't have a whole, board of directors or investors that are clamoring and saying we need more money. How do we
Yeah.
how do we trim down those budgets? So I just sometimes try to think about it in my own personal life of how that can kind of come about too, where you're really thinking about what the priority is, and in savings isn't a fun and exciting, it's not going on that fun next vacation, it's not, growing your home or something like that. And so I think we all have that sort of, preference in the back of our head to do something growth thinking or fun
Mhm.
activities as opposed to the savings that are going to get us and save us when we're, when I'm old and crotchety.
Yeah. The other thing you mentioned too, which I thought was interesting, is you mentioned Chicken Little.
Yep.
The sky is falling, the sky is falling.
Yes.
And you mentioned that BCPs, business continuity in general, isn't just
Yep.
for responding, disasters. Do you think that could be an issue that we caused ourselves? Because for the longest time, we did, and we were promoting business continuity is there for when you have a disaster.
Yep.
It was always that viewpoint. But now over the years, it's, let's prepare you, one, for if we do have a disaster,
Yep.
but two, we're prepared enough that issues don't become disasters.
Yeah.
And do you think we kind of cause some of our own issues by describing things that way at some point?
I think so. And I think, you know, when you're only thinking, like, I feel like a lot of professionals in the business continuity world and elsewhere, we're always thinking about what's the next disaster? What's the next horrible thing that's happening? What's happening horrible in the world? And we're
Mhm.
always thinking about that. And I feel like sometimes we go into those conversations with thinking about the worst of the worst. But I tell my professionals a lot, you're doing business continuity all the time. Anytime there's a little glitch and you've switched over something, that's business continuity as well. It just didn't happen to require pulling out the big plan, opening the binder, and saying, oh, what do I do for this? You're naturally doing business continuity on a daily basis. And you don't need me, the BC professional, to say, yep, let's activate those plans and let's pull them out and start doing that. It's really about that mindset of saying, how are we disruption proof? How are we responding to the day to day bumps in the road? But I think if we don't frame that with our business partners, they're not realizing that that's business continuity as well. They're thinking that business continuity is this big, massive disaster, and Jen Park is showing up to pull out your binders and walk you through that response structure. When in reality, business continuity is something that everybody's doing on a daily basis. So I think we are a little bit of our own worst enemies of framing it that way, but now I think we really need to go back to our business partners and say, no, you're doing business continuity all the time. And you don't need me to show up for you to enact your business continuity activities. It's just a natural part of how you run your teams and your departments to keep business running. So,
Yeah, I tell people, if you have some sort of a workaround, that's business continuity.
yep.
I said, if you're not doing any of that in your office, but you're driving to the supermarket,
Yep.
and there's a roadblock blocked off for sewer lines or
Yeah.
road maintenance or whatever, and you run on the spot, oh, I got to go this direction.
Hmm.
That's continuity. That's your business.
Yep.
If you want to use that same word, that's your business. You're finding an alternate way to get where you need to go. Well, that's business continuity too.
Continuity.
You're using it in your daily life.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great way to frame about it too. I feel like, especially as we're going into construction season everywhere, right?
Yes, actually, there's some down the road from
Yeah.
where I am right now.
Yeah. Right in my main town too. Yep.
Well, you mentioned we need to reframe and redefine business continuity for people to understand.
Mhm.
So I'm going to put you on the spot.
Yeah.
What's your definition of business continuity management?
Oh, that is a good question. I think it's really my definition of it is how are we planning for and responding to keep the business running in any way, shape, or form? There's a hiccup in the road, something doesn't work as planned or expected, and your business continuity management is being able to respond to that and keep the work flowing.
What's the difference with resilience then? Because that's one of the things that keeps happening in our industry as well.
Yep.
The terms are interchangeable. People think they're the exact same thing.
So I really view resilience as what you're doing to identify those risks and potentially mitigate them so that you don't actually need to use your business continuity plans. My boss, Brian, is really great. And he says, his job, we have a resiliency center of excellence that he oversees and runs and manages, and says, my job is to look at everything outside those four walls and hopefully put things in place, identify those risks, mitigate them so that we never actually have to use Genpark's business continuity program. And that's really where I view resilience. It's really thinking beyond the four walls and identifying those risks and then putting something in place, even if it's just identifying and say, hey, from an awareness perspective, you might want to think about XYZ because we see this in the horizon. We see this as a potential. And do we want to do anything and address it? If we do, that what I would sort of consider resilience of responding to those potential risks or incidents that might come our way. And then business continuity for me is that sort of hiccup, that disruption happened. And now we're actually trying to keep everything going as normal. So that's how I view the two. One is preventative and then one is after the fact.
Okay. On that note, we've come to the end of our first segment. We are talking about the downplaying of business continuity management with Jennifer Park, and we will be right back. If you like that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.